Freaks and geeks, we are jumping into my origin story as a horror fan. Every horror fan has one, and today I'm sharing mine. These are the movies, the shows, and the specials that crawled into my brain, scared me half to death, and made me fall in love with this weird and wonderful world that is horror. Now, I don't remember a time where I didn't love horror and Halloween. So this is going to be less of a chronology and a list and more of a walk through the years. And we start off that walk with training wheel horror. These are the ones that I watched as a kid that really cemented a love for Halloween, for fall, for the whole vibe that is spooky season. And honestly, these are some of the most millennial takes that are going to be on this entire list. So, of course, we start off with none other than Hocus Pocus. You've got witches, you've got magic, you've got pumpkins, and that feeling that Halloween was more than a holiday. It was a whole ass vibe. This was a signal that spooky season had begun growing up. The leaves started to change. There was a crispness in the air, and this came on TV. And these are the memories that I have growing up. So this was like appointment television growing up. And I love the fact that another generation just a few years later kind of got their flavor with Halloween Town. Halloween Town transports you into this whole other world where beasts and magic exist and it's Halloween all the time. That sounds like paradise to a kid like me growing up. But from there, Disney got a little darker with Don't Look Under the Bed. I remember when that first came out. That boogeyman reveal, if you're old enough, you know, it's still creepy. And then there is the quintessential millennial movie, The Nightmare Before Christmas, a movie that proved that scary and beautiful can live in the same frame. These were the sparks that lit the candle that would turn into a blazing inferno. From here, we go into the heavy hitters, The Exorcist. This was sheer terror for me. I grew up in a very supernaturally aware family where there is a lot of origin story and history when it comes to the supernatural and my family. And so this was horrifying to me growing up. Like this kid gets possessed and like that was where it got real because it wasn't about some serial killer. It wasn't about some slasher. It wasn't about some dream demon. It was about something that could happen. And it really shook me to the point where I probably spent the better part of a decade avoiding this movie after I saw the first one. And I didn't even see the sequels until I was probably in my 20s. The next one is Poltergeist. That clown doll scene messed me up as a kid. I don't like clowns. I don't like dolls. I don't like either one of those things. But I remember the cover of the box art caught my attention because I basically grew up in the video store. Some of my formative memories are scaling the shelves of the video rental store where it was all about two things. It was about horror and it was about wrestling. And I exhausted the entire selection of both of those at my local video store. And this was one that was recommended to me by the dude behind the counter. And I remember seeing the box art and was just kind of drawn in and watching it. And I think part of what got me with this one is, again, it was somebody that was probably about my age as I'm watching this. And so I'm like experiencing this vicariously through them. And this is one that didn't necessarily scare me in the same way that some of these others did, but it made me appreciate the suspense of it. And it kind of draws you in the same way that a Hocus Pocus does, or like, a Nightmare Before Christmas does with the beginnings of the haunting, where it almost seems whimsical. It almost seems magical, but then it shifts. Then it becomes something a lot more. Now, along the same time, there was a particular phenomena that was sweeping the nation with a little movie called The Blair Witch Project. Yes, I am that generation where we asked each other, "Oh, is that real?" Now, I remember that when this came out, and I fully recognize that if you were not there, I'm just fundamentally convinced that it will never hit as hard as what was like the proto-viral marketing campaign for this, and the way that they presented it as if this was actually a real documentary that was found. And before you had instant access to all of the world's information at your fingertips, and before you could just fact check something, you just kind of had to sit with what you were hearing and what you were experiencing. And kind of like Hocus Pocus was what it was and then got a spiritual successor years later, I found another version of this kind of phenomena that, while it wasn't formative, really relit the flame that was a passion for horror with Paranormal Activity. These two showed me the power of suggestion just years apart from each other. At this point, I knew what it was. By the point when Paranormal Activity came out, I knew what a viral marketing campaign was. But the way it presented itself and having a particular affinity for found footage, I love found footage. This was something that showed me that there was still life in the genre because for a long while there, I don't know, I just kind of was ignoring new releases because everything was a remake. Everything just kind of felt soulless for a little while until this came out. Now, not to mention, this also came out at a time where I was doing paranormal investigating. I was heavily involved in the supernatural field. And so this was like right up my alley. I like the Blair Witch Project. I was definitely the target audience for Paranormal Activity. Now, one of the subgenres of horror that I don't think gets nearly enough love is creature features. I love creature features. And to me, the quintessential creature feature is Godzilla. Now, you might not think of that as straight up horror, but come on. Giant monsters, destruction, fear of the unknown. That's cosmic horror in kaiju form. That's part of why I love Shin Godzilla and Minus One, because it went back to the beginning and recaptured that feeling of an unstoppable force that was just hellbent on destruction. And there was very little that you could do about it. And it forced you to sit in that feeling of dread and powerlessness. Now, we cannot walk through the history of horror without getting into slasher territory. I was raised on 80s and 90s horror, which means slashers were some of my formative experiences in the genre. But this is where things get a little weird, specifically with Halloween. Halloween was a really important franchise for me, but I actually have more nostalgic feeling for 2, 3, and 4 than I do for 1 because I saw those ones before I saw 1. Namely because 2 and 3 were sold together at a local store, and 4 and 5 were appointment television on a little thing called AMC Horror Fest. I loved Horror Fest. That was where I was first introduced to Elvira, Joe Bob Briggs, so many different specials, so many different B movies that cycled through Horror Fest. That was appointment television every single year, but it centered around 4 and 5. And those movies were some of my first loves in the genre. And in a lot of ways, I had a proxy on screen in the form of Jamie for 4 that wasn't there for me with 1. And so with 4, it feels like my generation's Halloween in a lot of regards. And with 2, that made Michael into a force of nature. I know it's popular to say that it's better off that they're not siblings. My hot take is that the series falls apart if they're not siblings. I think so much would have been saved with the David Gordon Green series if they would have just made them siblings. Keep 2 in continuity. You can erase 4, 5, and 6, and it makes a whole lot more sense because Michael really doesn't have a single lick of motivation outside of the whole familial connection piece. And that hot tub scene made me fundamentally uncomfortable as a kid. That was one of those first scenes where I remember I had to pause and walk away for a minute. And then 3, Season of the Witch. I remember when it was popular to hate this movie. It's not a bad movie. The biggest sin that this movie commits is that it's Halloween without Michael Myers. It really is ridiculous and fun and campy. And that scene with the bugs coming out of the face is just gross out horror, especially when you're young. Speaking of slashers, you can't get out of this conversation without talking about the Dream Demon himself, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street. There is an argument to be made that Nightmare was the first one that I saw. Parts 1 and 3 are pure nightmare fuel for me. I think it was 1 that I saw first. It's pretty close between 1 and 3. And there are scenes in both of them that, again, stuck with me as a kid. The scene with the body bag being drugged down the hall made me uncomfortable as a kid. The scene with the dude being brought along like a puppet by his tendons freaked me out. The dream logic, the kills, the pure imagery. Freddy wasn't just scary, he was imaginative. And as somebody who can lucid dream, that was a whole different flavor of messed up for me. Now, slashers live and die on one entry. Scream. The movie pulled the curtain back. It made me feel like I was in on the joke while still being scared out of my mind. There was no nice supernatural killer. It was all very real. It was all very down to earth and grounded. Now, I would go on to figure out that a lot of why I love specifically Nightmare and Scream is because I fundamentally think that Wes Craven is the best director. He is my favorite director of all time. John Carpenter is somewhere in the top 3. There really is such a flavor to Wes Craven's movies that so resonates with me. And in a lot of ways, Wes Craven's New Nightmare is right there along with Scream as one of those movies that brought that meta context, brought the horror into real life that totally changed things for me to show me that there was this whole other layer and level to horror where horror can get real, horror can get grounded. Then there were the movies that really warped me. Phantasm, The Tall Man, those silver spheres, the ridiculous abstract logic of it all. It's like stepping into a fever dream. And then couple that with Event Horizon, sci-fi cosmic horror that made me realize that space isn't the final frontier, it's the final hell. And then with that, Tales from the Crypt. That laugh could wake me up out of a dead sleep. We had HBO growing up, and that laugh scarred me. That show was the perfect mix of camp and gore and twisted morality plays. Every episode felt like sneaking a peek into something that I wasn't supposed to see. Now, walking through the eras of horror that made me a fan, I cannot forget to talk about Halloween TV specials. Home Improvement, Roseanne, TGIF. If you grew up in the 90s, you know exactly what I mean. Those sitcoms doing their spooky episodes gave us just enough scares to prep us for the real deal. They were like bite-sized haunted houses that were delivered straight to our living rooms. So that's a walk through my horror fan origin story, from Disney witches to demonic possession, from slashers to cosmic terror. These movies and shows carved me into the horror fan that I am today. Now, I want to know, what made you a horror fan? Was it Freddy? Was it Michael? Or maybe even something from your childhood that wasn't even supposed to be scary? Drop your horror origin story in the comments. I will be reading them all. I love to hear from you. If you love celebrating horror year-round like I do, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep the spooky vibes alive, because in this house, it's always Halloween. Peace, freaks.